feel it. The power. This throbbing. I can't help myself.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Danny here. Today, we're going to be talking about Witchblade, the manga. So, Witchblade, we're not talking about the comic book series. We are talking about a manga that is not based on the comic series at all, from what I know. So Witchblade is one of those interesting series that I got into a long time ago. I never really heard about it before. It's a big comic book series, right? From a non-Marvel DC Image production, right? It's from Top Cow. And it's over 200 issues, I think, when that series ended. Pretty impressive for one of those types of series, right? So it's a big hit, but I never really heard about it back in the day until a good friend of mine was like, hey man, I want to give you this. And I was like, oh, what is it? And I still have it to this day. It was volume 1 of the Witchblade anime. And it was a nice cover too. It was the DVD box with the hard sleeve cover that had the Velcro, has a little Velcro where you open the flap and, it has all this stuff inside. Really cool stuff. Still have that box to this day. Like I said, really high quality stuff from back in the day. And I was like, oh, okay, this looks interesting. And that's all I ever watched. It had I think 4 episodes. That was the standard back in the day, right? This was 2006. So that was getting my Inuyasha, buying the Blu-rays at Best Buy days, or DVDs at Best Buy. So that's all I knew for a while. And then I found out that, oh no, this is actually a comic book when I got more into comic books, heavily focused into there. And I was like, oh, okay, this is pretty cool. And then looking at the comic, I'm like, oh, this is nothing like what I watched. And then lately today, I've been reading more crossover comics. And then I stumbled upon, more Witchblade content. And when I was making this list, right, for this manga challenge, I found out that Witchblade had a manga as well. And I was like, what? This is crazy. So I had it on the list, and this is where we are today. So let's get into it, man. There's only 12 chapters, or issues, I should say. This comic book is a very interesting thing. This manga / comic book is not based off the anime, and the anime is not based off of this. This is also its own original story pertaining to even different stuff from the other two medias that this thing comes from. Top Cow wanted to collab with Studio Gonzo. That's the animation studio that did the Witchblade anime, and they decided, you know what, to promote this, we should do a manga series for this, which is not uncommon, right? Evangelion did the same thing. They did the manga ahead of time to promote the anime when it eventually would come out. So they did it with this, and Studio Gonzo, them, they did some Hellsing, Rosario Vampire. They even did Gantz, which, yeah, you guys get to see it when you're looking at that Black Cat. Yeah, all the classic stuff from this era. And so they said, okay, let's go ahead and do this. So we got the writer, Yasuko Kobayashi. Not only did she write the manga, but she also wrote the anime for it. And she did some other stuff, like a lot of Kamen Rider stuff. She did Guyver for 1 episode. Death Note for a few episodes here and there, Claymore as well. She's been around up to the latest stuff, like screenplay for Badland Rumbles, the Trigun movie. She was on Attack on Titan for a bit, and even, what was that last thing? Oh, Dororo, she worked on there too. So she's been in the game for a good while. And then it's drawn by Kazasa Sumida. I haven't read any of his stuff, but some of it here is Iro of the Dead, Flower Claw, Gecko no Carnival. All artists, so he's not really a writer, and I gotta say the art is fantastic. But here's the kicker for this. This is Top Cow Studio wanting to do a collab for this because the anime was coming out and they wanted to do an original thing for the anime. The manga was also published in the West, but not as a manga, right? This is 2006. You have to remember, manga in that time was abysmal. Pretty much, right? It was not as popular as it is today. So what did they decide to do? They had a prolific colorist from their company, I believe. I forget the colorist name. I'm going to look it up real quick. So they had him color the manga, and then they reversed it because, again, this is when manga wasn't popular, so they had to make it left to right. So that way the audience is not confused about what's going on. And it's not in the typical standard of manga volume publication, right? It was in the form of actual comic issues. After hearing about that and reading it, I was like, man, I kind of want to get this. I want to get these issues just to see what's going on, The colorist, his name is Blonde. He's worked in DC. Okay. So they had him do the coloring, which was pretty good. My only complaint about the coloring is the fact that when it comes to manga and comic books, if we're going to do a little history here, they are not typically done the same way. Sure, they have teams on both sides, right? But in manga, it's primarily black and white. And what does that mean? That means it's not stencil work that they pass on to somebody else to do the coloring. So they have like shader sheets, toners, and all that to get the shadows and, some form of coloring. So that's what they got going on there. And the shading just was not the best when it came to coloring over it, because it gets a little grainy when they transfer that stuff over to the US. But once you start reading it, it's not really a problem. But that's just the one thing I noticed right away. It was like, oh yeah, I could tell they just had a color over those toners, and that was not the best. But overall, still really solid coloring. The art is fantastic. Kazasa is, ooh man, he makes me want to read his other work just to see that art. So this 12-issue run here, like I said, it does not have the same storyline as the comic and as the anime. I should let you guys know, I have yet to read Witchblade the comic. I've known about it for a long time now, and I've read some crossover comics with the main lady Sarah from Witchblade, but I haven't really delved into the story. I just know that there's other things going on. But I did read the reboot series, right? Once the old series ended, they immediately started a new run. I think that's over already. But when I was reading that, it was pretty interesting. But yeah, different characters, different setting, different design, right? And one thing I like about this Witchblade stuff, all the 4 Witchblade users from all their respective series all have different designs. But I will say towards the end of the manga, the design for when the Witchblade is equipped does become more similar to the one in the anime, which I thought was good because then, when you watch the anime, you're like, is this the same thing? And then when you see the Witchblade design, you're like, oh, that's what I saw back when I read the manga. Anyways, going into the story here, follows high school girl Takeru in Japan, and she works in a shrine. She lives in a shrine with her grandma, and she's by herself. Her parents, we haven't known what's going on. She has 2 best friends. One's his childhood friend, who she saved in an accident by grafting skin on his hand that got severely injured. And he was also sword practicing, so he can no longer do that because he just can't get a solid grip anymore. And then her other best friend is this girl who's like real horny, if I have to say. Reading the first issue, it goes into explaining why they formatted it the way they did in the US. I forget if it was the writer for this or if it was somebody at Top Cow, but they said they would love to see it in color to help express the, and I quote, sexiness of the series. And if you know Witchblade, you know Witchblade. You know what I mean? Especially the anime. Jesus. Right? Like it's pretty 90s, the comic, but then when you watch the anime, you're like, oh, you clearly know what's going on here, man. And speaking of the anime, very similar themes into how the Witchblade affects the host. So that kind of makes me think that maybe this is similar. This is in the same timeline, same universe type of deal. I never finished the anime as well. I was actually thinking about watching it again, just to see a comparison about this manga to it. But one thing I do know is that the manga does some pretty interesting stuff, talking about demons, because, it is Japan, and they have Oni-like designs that I thought were pretty cool. And then the origin of the Witchblade, I think is different, right? I know in the comic it's an actual item, it's a set, it's part of a set of 9 items, and, there's 9 wielders, and, they go through all this stuff here. And then seeing it being explained here in the manga, it sounded like, it's like, oh, this is just the arm of a demon that people can, like, women can wield, right? The whole thing with Witchblade is only women can wield it, kind of thing. So I thought that was pretty interesting that they had kind of their own take on it, which is, back in the day, 2006, like, I think that's pretty bold for a series to do, right? Trying to get into a newer audience in a different location, right? From west to east, and then you decide to adapt it to fit their kind of appeal in media. Pretty bold stuff, right? Because then if you're going to start reading the Witchblade comic, yeah, drastic changes. But yeah, overall, this story, I liked it. I could see this actually just as an anime. I think that really says it in the writing. Really solid stuff overall. The character development was minimum at best. I mean, again, 12 chapters, that's not a lot to work with. And the chapters were averaging about 25 pages, which is the actual average, I believe, for comic books. So another layer right there with Top Cow on that to get, I guess, the Japanese audience more comfortable with that. Stunning artwork. The action was great. You could definitely see the influence from the comic series. You could see it was pretty well thought out on how they wanted to respect the character, the history behind it. There's even a panel when they were explaining about previous users of, if I'm not mistaken, her name was Sarah, right? The main wielder in the Witchblade comic series. The issue covers, I thought it's pretty cool because it's a mix of manga covers and Japanese covers and just the era itself. When you look at the cover, it just screams old for the good part though, so that was pretty fun looking at. Interesting concepts on what was going on, the demons and why they're back. Some plot twist at the end that I kind of wasn't, it was probably predictable, but I didn't expect it, mainly because, again, when I saw the anime for those first 4 episodes and how the Witchblade affects the users, and then hopping into this manga and then seeing the same exact thing, I didn't think twice about it. But then when they did the reveal of why this is affecting Takeru so much, and I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. I just wish they actually worked more into this storyline, because I just want more depth, more lore, and just a lot more overall. Really interesting ideas, but at the end of the day, it's mainly for promotional for the anime, which I don't mind because I still enjoy it. And the ending was actually a surprise for me, just the way they have to deal with the Witchblade, because the Witchblade itself, once it's on a host, it can never come off until they die. And then if you try to take it off, it's going to either kill them or do something else. And then we actually see that happen at the end of the manga. Man, the last 2 chapters had me pretty pumped, because we got this character that shows up, said oh, we haven't even seen the full potential of the Witchblade yet. He's probably assuming. And then, we see Takeru get a level up, right? Once she starts going more berserk, her grandmother gets killed. And then we actually see the design get upgraded, which I thought was pretty cool. She just straight up looked like a boss from Neo, when those samurais just take too much Amrita and they start turning into demons themselves, yokai. She looked just like that, and I thought that was pretty cool. But then when that happened, the main, what's his name? I think Kondo? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. It was similar to Kondo, but it's actually Ko. And something happens to him, right? And I was like, oh, this is pretty interesting, man, because when we see them fighting the demons, he's practically useless. Again, these are high school kids, and he has an arm that he can't properly use, his dominant arm. So his swordsmanship, it doesn't matter what he can do, even if he has a sword that could kill demons, because we find out he's a descendant from demon hunters. And I was like, man, I kind of wish they got more into it, especially at the end, right? Because it looks like everything's wrapped up, but I highly doubt it. It's oh, there's probably still demons out there. Who's going to take them out? I feel like he could have done something with this thing that he had, but we never got into it because, again, it was the last 2 issues and we had to wrap things up. So that was unfortunate to see his character go through, because I was like, oh, finally something interesting other than his love for Takeru. And speaking of power-ups in the Witchblade, let me talk about this design, man. Definitely takes from both sides, the anime and the comic, as far as how much they reveal, right? The lack of, I guess you could say, armor the Witchblade gives you. Just the uniqueness that it has, the tips of her hair turn into blades that she could attack with, like whips. It's actually a different color. It's like a moss green for the Witchblade itself. I thought that was interesting. And it's predominantly on the right or left hand is like the actual demon hand that these demon hunters severed many years ago. And that's how she mainly attacks with it. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. But, it being Witchblade, there's, some stuff that happens to where she actually starts wielding swords as her main weapon, which I thought was pretty cool because I don't think the other Witchblade users do that. But just where she gets it from, right, how she pulls it out of her body, just when I saw it, I was like, oh, wow, yeah, man, they know exactly who they're writing this for, who they're trying to get the attention to. And, it wasn't that surprising when I saw it because thinking back to the anime and I was like, you know what? Yeah, they kind of did stuff like that too. Like, goddamn, man, like this etchiness, bro. Really wild stuff. Good times. But yeah, pretty interesting to see it overall. And I think that's pretty much all I have to say, man. Really enjoyed it. I'd say check it out if you're a fan of Witchblade and you want just more content with that. Especially with the anime, because this is definitely closer to that since the writer for this manga also wrote the anime for it. And it's just a good time. Overall, again, I just wish it was longer. And really appreciate that artwork. And you know what's pretty crazy too is I guess like this colorist blonde is just so good. But it actually felt like a comic book. And I don't know if that has to do with the art itself. Because I looked at a little bit at the art from our boy here. And it just looks like an actual comic. Like somebody drew it from back in the day. Yeah, so that really surprised me. Just seeing how, I guess the colors just can't affect the inking when it comes to drawing it. And it also has that nice mid-2000s art style too. For the manga. Reminds me of a lot of stuff that I read before. And that's why I thought like, man, this art looks really familiar. It's like, oh no, it's just from that specific era. So that's not too bad in itself. So that's all I got to say today for Witchblade, the manga. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Give us an email, unversepodcast@gmail.com. Have you guys checked out Witchblade, the manga, or just the series in general? We'd love to hear your thoughts. We'll talk about that on the next episode. As always, you could follow us at Unverse Podcast, anywhere you go on social media, stay up to date when those episodes drop. Don't forget our other podcast, Marvel Talk, is out there as well. And that is all for today, guys. Again, thanks for swinging by, and we'll catch you on the next episode.